What if I told you the U.S. government is now over $34 trillion in debt and rising by billions every single day? That's more than the entire economies of China, Japan, and Germany combined. But here's what no one's telling you. This debt isn't just a number in Washington. In 2025, it's going to hit your wallet, your job, and even your freedom in ways you never imagined. Interest rates are climbing, foreign countries are backing off, and inflation may come back harder than before. So the question is, what happens when the world stops trusting the US dollar? And are we headed toward a financial collapse that could change life in America forever? Stick around, because you need to see this. Number 1. Rising interest rates mean bigger debt payments. Let's start with one of the most dangerous dominoes, interest rates. Right now, the U.S. government owes over $34 trillion, and just like you pay interest on a credit card, the government pays interest on that debt. But here's the catch. As the Federal Reserve continues raising interest rates to control inflation, the cost of borrowing skyrockets. That means the U.S. isn't just drowning in debt, it's now being crushed by the weight of the interest payments alone. To put this in perspective, in 2024, the U.S. spent over $1 trillion just on interest, more than it spent on national defense, and experts predict that number will explode even higher in 2025. That's money that could have gone toward schools, healthcare, infrastructure, or even tax relief. Instead, it's being burned just to stay afloat. Imagine earning a paycheck and having to give half of it away just to pay off credit card interest. That's exactly what's happening at the national level. So why should you care? Because when a bigger chunk of the budget goes to interest, the government has to find that money somewhere. That often means raising taxes, cutting public services, or even printing more money, which leads to, you guessed it, more inflation. And who ends up paying the price? You. Your rent goes up, your groceries cost more, and your savings lose value. This isn't just a Washington problem, it's a Main Street disaster in the making. And unless something changes, 2025 could be the year where interest on the national debt begins to drain the economy from the inside out. Number 2. Foreign countries are quietly pulling out. For years, countries like China, Japan, and Saudi Arabia have been some of the biggest buyers of U.S. debt. They saw U.S. Treasury bonds as a safe investment, stable, reliable, backed by the strength of the American economy. But that's changing fast. In the last 2 years, foreign demand for U.S. debt has dropped sharply. China alone has cut its holdings by over 20%, and other nations are following suit. Why? Because trust in the U.S. economy is wearing thin. Rising debt, political instability, and the increasing weaponization of the U.S. dollar have made other nations nervous. They're now diversifying into other currencies like the Chinese yuan, the euro, and even gold. And when fewer foreign investors buy U.S. debt, the government has to offer higher interest rates to attract new buyers. That leads to, you guessed it, even higher borrowing costs, which makes the debt problem even worse. But here's the real danger. If this trend continues, we may reach a tipping point where the world no longer sees the U.S. dollar as the global standard. That would cause the dollar to lose value, making everything imported. Gas, electronics, food, more expensive. Your cost of living would rise dramatically, and your savings would lose purchasing power overnight. This quiet exit by foreign lenders might seem like a slow leak, but in reality, it's a time bomb waiting to go off. And when it does, it won't just hit Wall Street, it'll hit every wallet in America. Number 3. Inflation is coming back. You may have heard politicians and news anchors saying that inflation is under control, but don't be fooled. The truth is, the recent slowdown was only temporary. With the government borrowing more than ever and the Federal Reserve pressured to print more money, a second wave of inflation is building, and 2025 could be the year it crashes down. Think about it. When the government spends money it doesn't have, it floods the economy with cheap dollars, making every single one in your wallet worth less. That means your salary doesn't stretch as far, your savings shrink in value, and the price of food, rent, gas, and essentials slowly climbs again, just like it did in 2022 and 2023. But this time it may hit harder and faster because the debt load is so much heavier now, and once inflation kicks back in, the Federal Reserve faces a no-win situation. Raise interest rates again? That makes the debt payments worse. Keep rates low? Inflation runs wild. Either way, you pay the price. At the grocery store, the gas pump, and maybe even at your job. This isn't just a possibility, it's a pattern, and unless major changes are made, 2025 could be the year it breaks wide open. We put a ton of research and effort into making these videos so you can stay informed in a noisy world. So if this opened your eyes, don't scroll away. Drop a comment and tell us how rising debt is affecting your life. And please, hit that subscribe button. It's just one click, but it means the world to us. Number 4. Social Security is quietly running out of time. Social Security has long been seen as one of the most trusted safety nets in America. Millions of retirees depend on it. Millions more are counting on it to be there when they finally clock out for good. But here's the harsh reality. The trust fund is running dry, and it's happening much faster than most people realize. According to the Social Security Administration, unless major changes are made, the program will no longer be able to pay full benefits by 2033. But the real strain begins in 2025 as more boomers retire and the government's ability to borrow weakens. Why? Because as the national debt soars, the money the government used to redirect towards Social Security is now being swallowed by interest payments. This means less funding for benefits and potentially devastating consequences for millions of Americans who are just a few years from retirement. And it won't just affect retirees. Younger generations will likely face higher payroll taxes, later retirement ages, or drastically reduced benefits. Imagine working your whole life only to be told, sorry, the money's gone. This isn't science fiction. This is math, and it's baked into the current system. The rising debt is choking the very programs Americans rely on most, and few people are sounding the alarm. If you're under 50, your retirement may not look anything like what your parents had. And if you're older, you may soon find your fixed income isn't enough to keep up with the cost of living. Social Security isn't just a number on a check, it's a lifeline, and the debt crisis is starting to cut it off, $1 at a time. Number 5. The U.S. dollar is losing its global power. For decades, the U.S. dollar has ruled the world. It's been the go-to currency for international trade, oil deals, and global reserves. But that dominance is now under serious threat, and it's directly tied to the growing mountain of U.S. debt. In 2025, we may start seeing the consequences in ways that affect every corner of your daily life. Countries like China, Russia, Brazil, and even Saudi Arabia are starting to trade in other currencies, forming alliances to reduce their dependence on the dollar. This trend is known as de-dollarization, and it's gaining serious momentum. Why? Because the U.S. debt is so large and our political instability so obvious that many nations no longer trust the dollar's long-term value. And when global trust fades, so does the dollar's power. That means the U.S. will have less influence internationally, and Americans will have less buying power at home. So, what happens if the dollar loses its spot as the world's reserve currency? Imports become more expensive, from electronics to cars to basic food supplies. The cost of living skyrockets, and the government may have to print even more money just to keep up, which fuels, you guessed it, more inflation. Think your paycheck doesn't go far now? Imagine paying double for the same groceries or gas. The U.S. dollar has been a symbol of strength for over a century. But now, with debt spiraling and global confidence cracking, 2025 could be the year it starts to fall from its throne, and the fallout will land right in the pockets of everyday Americans. Number 6. Wild market volatility is coming. If you think the stock market has been unpredictable in the past few years, just wait until 2025. The national debt crisis is setting the stage for a period of extreme market volatility, and it won't just affect Wall Street. It'll rattle retirement accounts, housing markets, and job security across the board. Here's why. Investors don't just react to numbers, they react to confidence. And when debt levels hit unsustainable highs, confidence in the U.S. economy begins to break down. That leads to sudden shifts in investment behavior, massive sell-offs, spiking interest rates, and a rush towards safe haven assets like gold and foreign currencies. If major credit agencies downgrade the U.S. credit rating again, as they did in 2011 and hinted at in 2023, it could trigger a full-blown financial panic. And that panic won't stay confined to trading floors. It'll hit your 401k, your real estate investments, and possibly your job as companies react to unstable conditions by slashing budgets. This isn't just theory. It's a chain reaction that's already happened in countries like Greece, Argentina, and Turkey. And while the U.S. is bigger, it's not immune. If volatility spikes, we could see massive losses in retirement portfolios, a tightening of credit that makes loans harder to get, and a general sense of financial instability that kills consumer confidence. That means people spend less, businesses shrink, and the economy spirals into recession. The worst part, most people won't see it coming until it's already too late. So, if you think the debt crisis is only about politicians arguing in Congress, think again. This is about protecting your future before the system shakes itself apart. Number 7. Higher taxes are no longer a question. Let's be brutally honest. Someone has to pay for all this debt, and spoiler alert, it won't be the politicians. It's going to be you. The U.S. government is spending more than it earns year after year, and by 2025, interest payments alone are expected to outpace almost every other budget item. That leaves two options: borrow even more or raise taxes. History shows us exactly what happens next. During past debt surges, governments have raised income taxes, capital gains taxes, corporate taxes, and even introduced entirely new taxes like VAT or national sales taxes. These aren't just for the rich. Middle-class families will feel it most. You may see smaller paychecks, higher bills, and fewer deductions, all while your cost of living keeps climbing. And it's not just federal taxes. States may increase their own taxes to cover shortfalls in federal funding. That could mean higher property taxes, sales taxes, and state income taxes, especially in already high-tax areas. For business owners and freelancers, the squeeze may be even tighter, reducing the incentive to hire, expand, or invest. It's a ripple effect. Higher taxes mean less spending, which slows the economy, which results in, you guessed it, even more debt. It's a vicious cycle, and unless there's a radical shift in fiscal policy, 2025 could mark the year when Americans feel the full weight of it. So if you think you're safe because you're not wealthy, think again. The government doesn't need to take more from the rich, it only needs to take a little more from everyone. And with over 300 million people to tax, that adds up real fast. The debt hole is deep, and taxes are the shovel being handed to the public. Number 8. Small businesses will be the first to fall. When we talk about economic collapse, most people think about Wall Street, big banks, or the government budget. But in reality, the first victims of a rising debt crisis are often small businesses, the local restaurants, shops, freelancers, and startups that hold up communities across America. Here's why. Small businesses depend heavily on affordable loans to keep growing, whether it's buying equipment, expanding locations, or simply covering payroll during slow months. But with interest rates climbing due to rising national debt, borrowing is getting more expensive by the day. A loan that used to cost 4% may now cost 8% or more. That might not sound like much, but for a small business operating on thin margins, that difference can mean life or death. Add to that rising taxes, inflation, and a decline in consumer spending, and it's the perfect storm for mass closures. And when small businesses fail, it doesn't just hurt entrepreneurs. It hurts everyone. Jobs disappear, innovation stalls, communities lose their character and economic diversity. More power gets concentrated in the hands of massive corporations who can afford to ride out the storm while the little guys drown. Think fewer choices, lower quality, and monopolies dominating every industry, from food to healthcare to tech. In 2025, if the debt continues to spiral, we won't just lose businesses, we'll lose the very foundation of the American economy. The dream that anyone can build something from nothing. And once that's gone, it's not just about economics anymore. It's about identity. Number 9. Public services will deteriorate fast. When debt grows out of control, governments are forced to make impossible choices. And one of the first things to get slashed? Public services. We're talking about the essential systems that keep everyday life running smoothly: public transportation, healthcare programs, education funding, clean water infrastructure, and more. As interest payments consume a larger share of the federal budget, less money is left over for these vital services. In fact, by 2025, the Congressional Budget Office warns that discretionary spending, everything not tied to mandatory programs like Social Security, could face deep, unavoidable cuts. That means fewer buses, overworked teachers, underfunded hospitals, crumbling roads, and longer wait times for basic assistance. It's not dramatic, it's mathematical. When the government must choose between paying off debt or funding schools, the schools lose. And it's not just at the federal level. As federal support dries up, state and local governments will have to pick up the slack, but they're already stretched thin. The result? More local tax hikes, more privatization of public goods, and widening inequality. Wealthier communities might be able to maintain decent services through higher taxes, but poorer areas will be left behind, creating a two-tier society where your zip code determines the quality of your water, roads, and schools. If this sounds extreme, just look at what's already happening in cities with budget shortfalls, closed libraries, canceled bus routes, and overflowing classrooms. The debt crisis won't just show up on the news, it'll show up in your neighborhood in ways that make daily life more difficult, more expensive, and more unfair. Number 10. The U.S. is entering a dangerous debt spiral. Here's the part nobody wants to talk about, but everyone should be paying attention to. The United States is flirting with a full-scale debt spiral. What does that mean? It's when a government borrows money just to pay the interest on previous debt, not to build roads, not to fund healthcare, not to grow the economy, just to stay alive. And once that cycle starts, it's almost impossible to escape. Think of it like a person using one credit card to pay off another, over and over again. Eventually, even the minimum payments become unaffordable. That's where the U.S. is heading. As interest rates rise and the debt keeps growing, more and more of the federal budget is being eaten by interest. If this continues, the government will be forced to borrow more to cover the cost of borrowing more. It becomes a self-feeding loop, and the longer it goes on, the more violent the collapse when it breaks. Countries like Argentina, Greece, and Venezuela have already lived through this nightmare. Currencies collapsed, inflation exploded, savings were wiped out, and millions were plunged into poverty. And while many believe it can't happen here, the early warning signs are already flashing red. If confidence in the U.S. economy fades, foreign investors could flee, interest rates could surge, and the dollar could lose its global standing overnight. At that point, printing money would be the only option left, and that leads straight to hyperinflation. Make no mistake, this isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a scenario backed by historical patterns and economic math. And unless drastic changes are made, 2025 could be the year it all begins. The U.S. debt crisis is no longer a distant warning. It's a ticking clock, and 2025 may be the year the alarm finally goes off. From rising interest rates and shrinking Social Security to crumbling public services and a weakening dollar, the impact won't stay locked inside government buildings. It'll spill into the streets, our homes, our jobs, and our wallets. And the scariest part? Most people still aren't paying attention. This crisis isn't just about numbers on a government report. It's about real people facing rising costs, reduced opportunities, and financial uncertainty. But awareness is the first step. Now that you know what's coming, you can prepare, protect yourself, and even push for change. Because if we don't act soon, the consequences will not only reshape our economy, they'll reshape the American way of life. So, what can you do in the face of a crisis this big? While we can't single-handedly stop the national debt from growing, we can take control of how we prepare and respond. First, protect your finances. Start by diversifying your income. Relying on a single paycheck in uncertain times is risky. Look into side hustles, remote work, or freelance opportunities to build an extra stream. Even a few $100s a month can create financial breathing room. Second, shift your savings strategy. Inflation eats away at cash sitting in traditional savings accounts. Consider moving some of your money into inflation-resistant assets like real estate, precious metals, or even low-volatility dividend stocks. If you're unsure where to start, speak with a certified financial advisor who understands economic cycles. Third, reduce personal debt. Credit card balances, car loans, or high-interest debt can become financial traps if interest rates spike. Paying them down now gives you more flexibility later. Finally, stay informed. Economic trends change quickly. Subscribe to reliable news sources, read financial reports, and most importantly, stay skeptical. Learn to spot the difference between fear-driven headlines and facts that truly matter. You can't stop the storm, but you can build a stronger shelter before it hits. We pour hours of research and effort into making videos like this, so if you learned something new, support us with just one click. Hit that subscribe button. Comment below and tell us what's your biggest concern about the debt crisis. And your support helps us keep going and keep digging deeper into the truth.